Neil, guys, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining me today. And whenever you're getting to see this, this is Balor speaking. My name comes from Balor of the Evil Eye, the oldest myths and legends in Irish mythology. And the reason I'm talking to you today is to talk about Lughnasadh. Lughnasadh is one of the four ancient festivals, the most important festivals that took place in Ireland, not just for a few hundred years, but for thousands of years. So the four main festivals were Samhain, which everybody has heard of in one form or another, which is, of course, Halloween. Then 3 months later, we have Imbolg, which is known today as St. Bridget's Day. Then we have Bealtaine, which the month of May is named after. And then, of course, finally, we have Lughnasadh. Lughnasadh is what August, the month of August in Irish, is named after. It's a very, very important time of year for us. Many traditions around it. I'm going to be giving you some little context on what it meant for the Irish people, and not just for us, but for the wider world, because people will not realize just how impactful Irish culture has been across the whole world. A little bit of background on me, I guess, because for some of you, it might be the first time seeing me, and you might think, what the hell is this guy talking about? So, my name, as I said, is Balor O'Brien. So, I go by this name because it's one of the oldest mythology stories in Ireland. Balor of the Evil Eye was this giant figure, the king of the Fomorians, and he ruled Ireland before humans. So, before humans, there was the fairies, or the Tuatha Dé Danann, and before them was the Fomorians. And the Fomorians were the big bad. They were the monsters and these wicked creatures that ruled Ireland. And Balor was the meanest and largest of them all. What inspired me most to get into storytelling was realizing that Balor was the inspiration for two figures in Lord of the Rings, one being the Sauron himself and the other the Balrog. So seeing how much Irish mythology influenced such books that I basically grew up on, it made me really excited to learn more about Irish mythology. And Lunas in particular is really important because it stretches into loads of different areas. Not just, it doesn't just stick to one area or another area. And Balor is in quite a central position for it because Lunacy is named after one of Ireland's gods. Lu, I would kind of describe him as the sun god for Ireland. And Lu's grandfather was Balor. So Balor, when he was a younger man, I suppose, he got this magical eye in the middle of his head. One legend tells us that his dad was king of the Fomorians before him, and when Balor was only a young little lad, he crept into where his dad's druids were mixing a huge cauldron full of potion. And being very curious, he peeked inside, and when he peeked inside, the fumes went up into his head, and they gave him this third eye in the middle of his forehead. And when he opened it, he could blast out fire or blast out venom, depending on which story you hear. And he used this power to conquer and subjugate many peoples. This didn't make him too popular, I can tell you that. So some of the people who disliked him, well, one in particular was Nuada. Nuada was the leader of the Tuatha Dé Danann, and some say that he was the inspiration, at least in part, for Jaime Lannister, because of course in the first battle with Balor, he loses his hand, and he's given a silver one in replacement. Eventually, someone uses magic and he's able to regrow an arm made of flesh and bone. And once he has that, he launches another war against Balor. And this time he has Lu. So, how did Lu come into being? Well, Balor's wife prophesied that Balor would be defeated by his grandson, one of his grandsons. And so, fearful of this, he had one daughter and he locked her in a tower made of crystal with 50 handmaidens to look after her. But these handmaidens, one or two of them were able to sneak one of the two of the Danann into the tower. And of course, she ran off. She fell in love and she ran off. And three boys were born, three grandsons for Balor. Two of them were killed at Balor's hands. Some say there's two theories. One is that he drowned them, the other is that he ate them. And so Lugh somehow survived. He escaped this ordeal, and he was raised by the Tuatha De Danann, and he was raised with the single purpose of defeating Balor. He was given this magical spear. Some say it's called the Spear of Destiny, and he threw it in this huge battle against Balor. He hurled it with all of his might straight at the beast, and it struck Balor in the eye. Some say it killed him outright, others say it weakened him to the point that he has had to spend the rest of his days living in the wilderness in Ireland, disguising himself as an old man, moving from place to place. And ever since then, people have held this huge festival called Lughnasadh, where we worship Lugh, our sun god. And of course, for it being the sun god, people will travel to mountains. So we will climb mountains in order to get closer to the sun, get closer to this god, and we worship him in order to have a good harvest and to ensure that we have good regular cycles in Ireland. Really important part of it. Um, Now that was kind of a bit of a background to Lugh. I'm going to deviate a little bit away from the traditional festival elements, because if you want to, in County Clare, where I am from, you can head to Mount Callan in the west of Clare, or you can head to Slieve Carron up in the Burren. And both of those places, there are altars, ancient altars, stone altars left up there, where people go up and they worship, and they have everyone has their own little ceremony. Others go up to Croagh Patrick. I myself took my kids last year, and I was due last year to start doing the content, but I've just not had the time. I filmed walking up dressed in face paint this time last year up Croagh Patrick. Tell you, it was a bad idea, because I tried to go in character a little bit too much. It was a scorcher of a day, and the face paint was dripping off me as I was carrying my kids up the mountain, because they're still only youngsters. And so before it was called Croagh Patrick, it was called the Reek. The mountain was called the Reek, and it goes back way before Patrick's time, or before the arrival of Christianity to Ireland. And that's why you hear an awful lot of similarity when you're researching or learning about Irish paganism. God, it sounds very like Christian stories you'd hear in Ireland. That's because Ireland had such a strong and deeply rooted pagan system here, that the Christians had to completely reinvent it and interpret it for their own ends, in order to kind of get people to switch over from one religion to the next. So if people wanted saints, if the people had not saints, but local figures that they worshipped, they anointed them, they gave them sainthoods. And holy wells, they were these ancient sites. Some of them were called Kyles, Derony Kyles, and they were ancient places for lost souls to be buried nearby, so that they could be kind of finding their way through the holy well into the afterlife. So goes in loads of different directions. Of course, Ireland is we had an oral tradition, I should say. So we pass down our information from person to person, and of course, like Chinese whispers, we all change the stories a small little bit. So you can go around Ireland, you can go around the world, and you'll ask the same people 100 people the same question. You'll get a different answer from every single one of them. The reason for that is because it was interpretive. Different people heard different versions of the same story. So I wanted to dive into a little bit more of what made Lughnasadh important. For me, what made it really special it isn't all about climbing to the top of the mountain. That can be very special. As I mentioned, a few locations you can do it in, but it wasn't the only thing that mattered about them, because Lugh held around the same time the Chalton Games. Now, the Chalton Games were named after Lugh's foster mother, Chaltu, and she was supposedly the goddess of harvest. So some say she cleared all of the stones out of Ireland. Well, she didn't clear all of them, obviously, if you've ever been to the Burren or to Connemara. But she didn't get this far, but she cleared out huge swaths of Leinster and made it possible for people to sit there and to settle in Ireland. And it did an awful lot of good for the people here. Now, when she died, Lou wanted to remember her fondly. So, in order to do that, he held this huge 2 week event. So, this happened constantly in Ireland since about 1863 ish BC, right up until 1171 or 1169 or 68, depending on your source. S- So for what is that? Nearly 4,000 years, or well over, well, nearly 3,000 years. For nearly 3,000 years, we had the Chalton Games almost continuously. These games predate the ancient Olympics by 1,200 years. You might be thinking, he's talking out his arse. I'm not at all. I've been there. I've been up to where the two games took place up in Telltown. I've spoken to the people in the area. Any stories I'm telling you, I have walked the fields. I have talked to the local people. Not all of them, maybe, but as many as I could find. I've done the research myself, and I grew up with Eddie Lennon coming to my parents' house on a regular basis, telling us stories and entrancing us with them. So I have grown up my whole life living and breathing Irish folklore, Irish heritage. And there's nothing I am more passionate about. And there's nothing else I do with my time. When I'm going to bed and I can't sleep, I am Googling, I am listening to podcasts, I'm listening to any little bits of historical or cultural information that I haven't quite gotten right yet. And with the Charlton Games, I mention it now because it always it always took place overlapping Lughnasadh. Some say it happened in the last 2 weeks of July leading up to Lughnasadh. Others say that it happened kind of from the start of August, so the start at the end of Lughnasadh for 2 weeks. So it's up to you. I personally think that there's more evidence to support it happening in July and having a lead up to Lughnasadh. So the Cheltenham Games, I mentioned that they inspired the Olympics. There's three sections to the games. Ireland was split up for most of our history into over 100 kingdoms. Now, it wasn't always 100 kingdoms. It was constantly in a state of flux, because you had different families marrying each other, you had different families joining and forming alliances or going to war with each other. So it was complicated. It wasn't that clear of a thing. Now, what we did have, though, was a way of keeping peace. Everyone went up to County Meath to Cheltown and they held the games, and they celebrated the dead. They set out the laws so that people wouldn't go to war with each other. And the third thing was they held games there. Now, when I say games, I don't just mean sporting events. They had storytelling events, dancing competitions, they had art, they had poetry, they had any talent. It didn't matter what it was. Talent was appreciated for being talent. They wanted you to show off your ability. They wanted you to show what you were capable of. And I think that's just, it's a beautiful concept. It's very tragic that we've lost it today. Uh, you know, but I think it's why Ireland has produced so many artists, musicians, actors, athletes, storytellers, and writers. The reason being that for thousands of years, our ancestors lived and breathed these kinds of traditions. And so I think we still benefit from the legacy of it, that we still gain something from that past. Now, the games, as I mentioned, they did stop in around 1171. The reason for that was the Normans arrived. So we managed to survive the Vikings with the games intact, but they couldn't survive the Normans. So once the Normans arrived, different different factions started to align with different people, and with so many opposing groups, it wasn't possible to keep everyone together. It wasn't possible to keep the games and the traditions alive, so they kind of faded into obscurity. Some games would have survived locally, local versions of the Cheltenham Games, but the games themselves were gone until a gentleman, and produce. I'll try and produce something, and he's here. Again, a man called Michael Cusick. So this little ring, you might not be able to see it here, but it says GAA on it. So it's a GAA ring. So the man who founded the GAA, Michael Cusick, he was inspired by Irish folklore, Irish myths and legends. And he saw the Cheltenham Games and he said, we've got to resurrect the games. And that's exactly what he did. He knew he wouldn't be able to do everything, and he was a huge He was a fantastic athlete himself. He lived and breathed sport. So he said, "I'll do the games." So what have we? We've Gaelic football and we've hurling, and he focused on those. He had to make it very simple. He couldn't complicate the games or they wouldn't work, and he had to call them something different. He had to call them the GAA. But don't forget that and the ancient Olympics, they get their basis, their inspiration is the Chalton Games. So these games that nobody remembers and no one celebrates. And the story of the Chalton Games, it doesn't just end there, because in August in 2020, sorry, in 1924 in August, the Ireland held the largest sporting event in the world, and it was the Chalton Games. And it was brought back. The second Ireland was made independent from British rule, the Irish Free State government, Cumann na Gael, they immediately got together and started organising it. Now, we had a civil war in the middle, so it wasn't possible to get it done immediately, but we did hold the games. And as soon as those games were held, it was it was enormously impactful. They wanted to show not the Irish people, but the wider world that Ireland might be a new state, but we're a very old culture and very, very proud. And we're looking to our ancient ancestors and saying, look at the Cheltenham Games and look at what we've been doing for all this time. We want recognition for it. So the Chalton Games were actually larger than the Paris Olympics in 1924. That's how big they were. We had Olympic athletes coming to perform, including Johnny Weissmuller. He was a US Hollywood star in the 1930s. He played Tarzan in a couple of the films. And of course, he'd won several medals at the Olympics for America. So he was invited to the Cheltenham Games, and Ireland being a third world country at the time, we didn't even have a swimming pool for him to compete in. Ever the innovators, we found a solution up in Dublin. We brought him into Dublin Zoo, we cleared out the pond, and we had him swimming and winning the race in the pond. So always the innovators. And I love how all of this stuff, it kind of links into, as I say, it links into Lughnasadh. You've a couple of other festivals, like one worshipping a goddess, Carmen. So the Festival of Carmen. She was said to have come to Ireland from Greece. And it kind of, there's an awful lot of links with Greece and ancient Ireland. So it's very possible. That's why we say there's a strong argument for the ancient Olympics being inspired, heavily inspired, I might add, by the Cheltenham Games. And when the games were taking place one year, it was said that Carmen arrived. Excuse me, at the end of the games when they were celebrating Lughnasadh, Carmen arrived in Ireland and she had her three sons with her, and they were wicked, powerful figures. They came all the way from Greece, and their plan was to conquer Ireland. So they were conquering Leinster bit by bit. And the heroes in Munster were watching this in horror. And they said, we cannot allow this to stand. If we do nothing, they will conquer all of us if we don't stand up. So they raced forward, and the greatest heroes in Ireland met these four wicked figures, and they beat them one by one into submission. They were given a choice. Carmen could either be sealed in Ireland forever, or her three sons could flee Ireland and return to Greece, or all four of them would be murdered. Now, Carmen wanted to continue the fight, but her three sons all elected to throw their mom under the bus. So poor mommy got trapped for eternity in Ireland, while her three sons were able to skip off home. Now, legend has it that her sons continue every Lughnasadh to attempt to break the gateways between our world and theirs and get back here. And they wished nothing more than to release their mother, because, of course, she was far more powerful than any one of them. And they believed that with her help, they might have a second crack at conquering Ireland. So every Lughnasadh, some people perform little spiritual prayers or pagan rituals in order to keep her at bay and to keep her locked away so that her sons can never find her and bring her back. Now, guys, I'm conscious of the time. I'm conscious that you'll be tied up with things to do for the rest of the night and wake up nice and early, I'm sure, to celebrate Lunasa. I myself am going to try and drag the kids up to either Mount Callan or Slieve Carron. So I might get to see one or two of you there, I hope. And I hope some of you enjoyed this. I hope you found it interesting. What fascinates me most is how everything in Irish mythology is interconnected. So I love just jumping into all these different ways that they kind of link into one another. I hope you got something out of it. And I hope you'll kind of be intrigued to search out and find out more for yourselves, because I've no doubt you'll find out information about Lugh and Balor and the Chelton games that I would never be able to find out myself. And I hope you share it in the comments. So slán go fóill, lads, and mind yourselves out there.